Welcome to Sakai Rubrics. This training will address the theory of using rubrics in a classroom setting, as well as best practices, demonstrate how to build an effective rubric, and show how to grade Sakai assignments with rubrics. Let's start with rubric theory. Why use rubrics at all? This method states clear student goals or expectations using descriptive adjectives across increasing levels of performance. In doing so, evaluation becomes more objective and fair. This also reduces the amount of time it takes an instructor to evaluate performance because they are looking for specific criteria at specific levels in a systematic way. What does a strong rubric do? In essence, a rubric is a structured chart. It uses adjectives that describe specific tasks. These tasks are separated out so an evaluator can focus on a small part rather than juggling multiple tasks at once. Consider how much easier it would be to focus on just proper capitalization throughout a paper rather than catching all the capitalization, all the spelling, all the punctuation, and all the grammar mistakes at once. These rubric tasks should also be aligned with the course or module learning objectives because all activities within a course serve the purpose of supporting these objectives. If a rubric is clear, students should be able to pre-grade themselves on their performance and reach a similar conclusion as any evaluator. This calls back to the objectivity of evaluating. Typically, a strong rubric focuses on the evaluation of performance on a handful of specific tasks and describes them in ascending order of achievement. For example, bad to okay to great. This should result in a targeted feedback when a task is evaluated as lower performing, but the other tasks were higher performing. How should a strong rubric be set up? First, identify the specific tasks that are important to the performance and support the course or module learning objectives. To keep a rubric from becoming unwieldy, a best practice is to keep categories to a small handful. It's easiest to begin with writing a clear task description that applies to the best or top performing level simply because this is what an instructor is envisioning as a best case scenario. Then it becomes easier to work down to less proficient levels by swapping out adjectives and numerical values. In this example of the criterion spelling and grammar, the best performance level uses the phrase no errors and awards full points. The next level down specifies 1 to 3 errors, while the other levels use 4 to 5 errors or more than 5 errors. By using such specifications between levels, there's no subjective grading, and thus it makes it far more consistent and fair when grading multiple performers. A note about numerical versus analytical rubrics. There are technically different types of rubrics that have different applications. A numerical rubric uses specific number points for tasks, just like the examples shown so far. These become a cumulative total that is converted into a traditional grading scale. Therefore, numerical rubrics are required in a learning management system like Sakai if an assignment with a rubric is attached to a gradebook item. The other rubric type is analytical and is generally used for overall feedback and improvement, where a numerical score is unnecessary. How many points should a level be? A best practice is to keep it simple. If you always have a bottom level of 0 for a criterion that is missing completely, and a top level that is not missing anything, then it makes it easier to write clear task levels that fall in between. Points between task levels should be small so that an evaluator can justify a rank. Consider this. If an unacceptable level is given a range of 0 to 5, how do you determine points at all? If a performer was missing something, would they get a 0 or a 1 or 5? If rubric tasks are built like this, a performer could have a submission that's missing everything important and still receive points. Therefore, a performer could add points to their numerical score for the course but not hit any of the learning objectives, defeating the purpose of the assignment. Now a note about proficient and exemplary points in numerical rubrics. As with any assignment, instructors and students hope to achieve at least proficiency. But what about students who go above and beyond proficiency? This is where an additional task level can be added. In keeping clear, distinctive differences between task levels, an exemplary description should also be above and beyond a proficient description. Additional points for this advanced level are also added to the rubric, but the point ranges should still be kept simple and small between task levels so that a proficient student is not effectively docked possible points for not going above and beyond. For example, if a proficient task level is set to 5, while an exemplary task level is set to 10, then the exemplary student earns twice the points as a proficient student, even though a proficient student met a good standard. If all the rubrics in a course are set this way, the proficient student will finish with a much lower final grade than the exemplary student. Let's begin to build rubrics. Often the first question is, how do I enable rubrics in Sakai? Once an instructor logs into a Sakai course, clicking Site Info brings up Tool option to enable rubrics. Make sure the checkbox is marked. This may be already enabled in your course. Instructors are able to browse rubrics others have created in the local LMS to copy or edit to their course. How do I copy a rubric? The shared rubrics are listed below the Sakai course's private rubrics section. These rubrics have been released by other instructors. If you find one you'd like to use, click the dual paper icon. This will make a copy in your private rubric list, often beginning with the name, copy of, and the rubric name. Beware, there are always good and bad rubrics that are created and shared. Consider your specific learning objectives and consider where a shared rubric actually aligns to those or not. How do I build a rubric? Once a rubric tool is enabled in your Sakai course, click Rubrics. To build a blank rubric, click Add Rubric and name it. Use a clear, distinctive name that identifies for which assignment this rubric will apply. For example, a forum rubric will be different than a research paper rubric. Clear naming will come in handy later when applying rubrics to specific assignments within a course in the gradebook. You can add or delete criteria, also known as tasks, but be sure to name these clearly to separate and focus on what is being evaluated with the rubric. A rating title is also known as a task level. Here is where you can write clear, specific descriptions that use differentiated adjectives and apply numerical values. Titles and tasks can be arranged across in descending or ascending order. These are also editable by clicking the three lines to drag and drop titles in a rearranged order. The same applies to rearranging criteria. Let's consider the rationale for copying versus building a rubric. Anyone can share a rubric. Consider your specific learning objectives and whether a shared rubric actually aligns to those or not. A strategic approach would be for departments that often assign similar assignments to develop strong rubrics together that are applicable enough to be shared and reused. For example, forums are a great activity to reuse a common rubric. Over time, with strong shared rubrics, students will become familiar with and consistently understand what is expected of their work. This is a top reason to use rubrics. It also helps to ensure consistent evaluations among instructors. The second reason to use rubrics. Remember the tip about clearly naming rubrics? Here's where that practice pays off. When creating an assignment posting within Sakai, at the bottom of the screen is an option to apply an existing rubric. Make sure the dial button is selected and choose a rubric from the drop-down menu. A preview button is also available if you want to remind yourself exactly what was on that rubric. A similar application is available in the gradebook to attach and preview rubrics to items that way too. How do I attach a rubric to a forum? This is a common practice in Sakai, especially as forum rubrics are usable by many instructors. After creating a forum posting, create a gradebook item for that forum. The same drop-down and preview option is available. Now let's grade an assignment with a rubric. After students have submitted work, an instructor will select an assignment to grade. All assignments that have a Sakai rubric attached will display a rubric icon next to the assignment title. Instructors simply click on the student name to view work and then click the Grading Rubric tab. This allows instructors to quickly click task levels as they assess. Points are automatically calculated, even if the task level evaluation is changed. This leads to much more quicker evaluating for instructors. And since students can also see the rubric, they can understand where they earned or lost points as a feedback method. Grading forums with rubrics works in a similar way as well. Points are auto-calculated and the instructor clicks task levels. And the comments tool is available if an instructor wants to leave specific discussion to a student. After all this grading, where does a rubric score go in Sakai? The great news is all assignments and forums with rubrics attached will automatically save the score in the gradebook to that item. Scores will also update automatically if an instructor regrades an assignment. Allowing students to resubmit and regrade supports a growth mindset. This is the last way rubrics save instruction time. If you have questions or need help with rubrics, contact the WLU Office of eLearning.